Most people start a new job thinking about the first impression they'll make. Almost no one leaves thinking about the last impression they'll leave behind. And that oversight comes with a price very few people recognize until it's too late. Because in the corporate world, the way you leave shapes your long-term reputation far more than the way you arrived. It may sound like a minor detail, but it isn't. For years, you were taught to prepare for your first interview, your first email, your first meeting with your new manager. No one taught you to prepare for your last conversation, your last message, or the final impression you leave once you've decided to move on. And yet, whether that departure is handled well or poorly often has a greater impact on your future career than any accomplishment you achieved while working at that company. There's a concept that very few people ever talk about, yet it explains a huge part of how a quiet professional reputation is built over the years. It's called your exit legacy. It isn't what you said on the day you resigned. It's what people remember months later, when your name comes up in a casual conversation, when someone asks whether you're worth hiring, or when a former colleague decides whether to recommend you or stay silent. That legacy isn't built during the exit interview. It's built in the way you handled your final weeks, your last deliverables, and your last difficult conversations. Think about someone you worked with years ago, a former manager, an old coworker, someone you collaborated closely with on an important project. Chances are, without even trying, you can remember exactly how that person left the company. You don't necessarily remember everything they accomplished during the 3 years you worked together, but you do remember whether they left on good terms, left without notice, left everything organized, or walked away, leaving behind a mess everyone else had to clean up. That's the simplest proof that an exit legacy is real, and that you're building your own right now, whether you realize it or not. Some stories illustrate this with uncomfortable clarity. One professional resigned carrying a great deal of resentment. She documented nothing, gave very little notice, and allowed her team to find out through rumors. 3 years later, that same company opened a leadership position in another department, and her former manager was informally asked whether she was worth considering. The response was brief and final. She was rejected before the hiring process even began, not because her work had been poor, but because of the way she left. On the other hand, there are people who leave a company with everything in order, a well-planned transition, and an honest conversation with their manager. Years later, that same manager, now a client at another organization, became the person who recommended them for a contract that completely transformed their career. The difference between those two paths wasn't talent. It was the exit. What supports stories like these isn't coincidence. It's a pattern that repeats itself with uncomfortable consistency across every industry. Hiring decisions, referrals, and professional trust are rarely based on technical skills alone. They're based on the quiet question everyone asks before putting their own name behind yours. Can I trust how this person behaves when a professional relationship comes to an end? That question isn't answered by your resume. It's answered by your history of departures, even though that history never appears in any official document. There are different ways to leave a job, and each one builds a specific reputation, whether you ever say it out loud or not. It's worth looking at each of them because chances are you'll recognize yourself in at least one. There's the quiet exit, where you simply stop putting in the effort weeks before you actually leave. Your commitment fades, your work becomes the bare minimum, and meetings stop mattering to you. Everyone around you notices, even if no one says anything directly. What people remember isn't your burnout, which may have been completely real and understandable, but a reputation for checking out, the quiet impression that, at some point, you stopped showing up mentally even though you were still officially part of the team. Then there's the emotional exit, where months of accumulated resentment spill out through comments, complaints, or a goodbye filled with accusations that feel completely justified in the moment, but rarely help you afterward. People who leave this way often feel immediate relief, followed much later by regret, when they realize those words became attached to a reputation for being unpredictable. The lingering impression that no one is ever entirely sure what to expect from them under pressure. There's also the strategic exit, where you document your accomplishments, wrap up projects in an organized way, and leave a clear transition plan for the person taking over your responsibilities. This is the kind of departure almost no one celebrates in the moment, but over time, it builds a reputation for solid professionalism, the kind of quiet reputation that opens doors without you ever having to ask. And finally, there's the negotiated exit, the most sophisticated of them all. This is where you openly discuss the terms of your departure, protect key professional relationships, and leave with clear agreements about how your exit will be communicated. This approach builds something even more valuable: a reputation for executive maturity, the perception that you know how to handle sensitive situations with the same clarity you bring to your everyday work. If you recognized yourself in the quiet exit or the emotional exit, this isn't a judgment about who you are. It's information. The question worth asking yourself isn't what kind of person you are. It's what kind of reputation you want to keep building every time a chapter of your career comes to an end. Before you leave, there's something most professionals forget to do, and later wish they had. Document what you accomplished. Not to brag, but to have clear evidence of your impact when it's time to negotiate your next position, justify your salary, or simply remember exactly what you contributed. It's remarkable how many women leave a company after years of hard work without a single organized record of the projects they led, the problems they solved, or the results they produced. That information may seem unnecessary while you're still there, but it becomes incredibly valuable at the exact moment you need it most. And by then, it's often too late to reconstruct it accurately. There's one conversation that almost no one prepares for carefully, even though it can define the tone of your entire departure. It's the conversation with your manager when you tell her you're leaving. There's a good chance that, in that moment, you'll hear phrases designed to make you second-guess your decision. With carefully measured calm, your manager might say something like, "You know you've always had a place here." Or she might try to buy time with something even more direct. "Give us a little more time to think about a counteroffer." Those phrases aren't aggressive, and that's exactly why they work. What you say after hearing them, how you say it, and especially what you choose not to say, will stay in that person's memory for a long time. This isn't about lying or pretending to feel gratitude you don't genuinely have. It's about choosing your words with the same level of strategy you would use in a job interview. Express appreciation for what was truly worthwhile. Be honest without being destructive, and make it clear that your departure is a professional decision, not an emotional reaction. And there's one final detail that very few people consider, even though it has an enormous impact on how your departure is perceived throughout the organization. It's the way you announce your exit to the rest of the team. There's a huge difference between disappearing overnight and letting rumors write the story for you, and communicating your departure intentionally, thanking the right people, and protecting the relationships you spent years building. That final message isn't an empty formality. It's your last opportunity to shape how people will remember you inside that company, long after you're gone. Getting in with a strategy lands you the job. Leaving with a strategy builds your career. Very few people approach it that way. The ones who do are often the people who, years later, receive an unexpected phone call, a recommendation, or an opportunity that seems to come out of nowhere. But in reality, it was born from a well-managed departure long ago. Take a moment to think about your current exit, if you're already planning to leave, or about your last one, if you're still at the same company. That answer, more than any recent achievement, is probably the thing quietly shaping your next opportunity. Understanding this before most people do is exactly the kind of quiet advantage that separates those who merely survive the corporate world from those who understand it well enough to navigate it intelligently. If you want to keep developing that same level of insight with every video, stick around, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because that's the simplest way to stay one step ahead of the unwritten rules no one else is going to explain to you.